By this time, the discovery of America had transformed the west of Scotland from a forgotten frontier of medieval Europe to a gateway to the New World. Trade was becoming more and more important, and the river was seen as the key to prosperity. However, though there are records of attempts by Glasgow and the other Clyde boroughs to clear a channel through the sandbank at Dumbuck as early as 1456, these had little effect, and Glasgow's merchants still had to trade through Clyde coast ports or use gabberts or lighters, small flat-bottomed riverboats, to load and unload seagoing ships on the lower Clyde. Eventually, in 1668, finding the burghers of Dumbarton reluctant to assist them, Glasgow built its own port 19 miles down the Clyde at Newark Bay, which of course became Port Glasgow. With the Act of Union in 1707, Scotland was at last free to trade with the colonies without restriction. By the middle of the 18th century, Glasgow had become a very wealthy town. Its merchants had earned themselves the name tobacco lords because of their overwhelming control of the tobacco trade, though they also made fortunes in sugar, rum, and, I'm sorry to say, slavery.
So what was Clydebank like then?
Well, you get time? I'll tell you. Clydebank itself was mostly just fields. The fast-flowing burns which tumble down the Kilpatricks often cut much of the district off in the winter and spring. However, these burns were ideal for driving mill wheels and very useful for industries which use a lot of water. So a lot of small industries sprang up, which brought more people into the area and turned small settlements into villages and small towns. There was the paper mill and print works at Dalmuir, a distillery in the Yoker Burn, the Dalnotter Iron Works near Old Kilpatrick, an early boatyard there, and several textile mills round Hardgate and Duntoker, which became an important manufacturing centre with a population of about 2,000 early in the 19th century. Industry was further stimulated with the building of the Forth and Clyde Canal, following the line the Romans had taken 1,600 years before along the valleys of the Carron and the Kelvin. First linking the Forth with the north of Glasgow in the 1770s, then completed in 1790 and officially opened when a barrel of water from the Forth was mingled with that of the Clyde at Bowling. While water power ran mill wheels, so throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, civil engineers set about harnessing the flow of the Clyde, building jetties and dikes to deepen the channel and allow ships to come up the river, past the sandbank at Dumbuck, right up to the Brummelaw, the long-held dream of generations of Glasgow merchants. At Dunglass, there's a monument to a man without whom the Clyde would never have become the world's greatest shipbuilding river. Henry Bell built the first steamship, the Comet, which plied its way up and down the Clyde in 1812. The commercial benefits of steam-powered shipping were clear. The development of steam-powered dredgers meant that a wider channel could be kept clear, while tugs could tow large sailing ships upriver without a wind. Many of the west of Scotland's skilled engineers turned to marine engineering. One of these was Robert Napier, and it was his technical expertise and his entrepreneurial flair that really established shipbuilding on the Upper Clyde. The widespread introduction of iron ships put Glasgow's engineers at the forefront of shipbuilding technology with no real competition. Yards sprang up all over the Upper Clyde, many of them set up by Robert Napier's former employees, including two brothers, James and George Thompson, who built their Clydebank foundry at Finnieston in 1847, and then set up the Clydebank Iron Shipyard at Cessnock Bank in Govan, beside Napier's own yard. J&G Thompson's originally specialised in small to medium-sized ships with sophisticated engineering, while Napier got the big contracts for Cunarders' North Atlantic crossing, as he had a share in the company. Thompson's got many of the smaller ones because their brother was Cunard's superintendent engineer and established a business relationship that was to last over a century. By the second half of the 19th century, Glasgow had become a busy port, thronged with large and small vessels. The Clyde Navigation Trust, who controlled the river and its quays and harbours, decided to build new docks at Govan to cope with ever-increasing trade. This forced the Thompsons to move elsewhere. In 1871, under the direction of James Roger Thompson, son of George, they took the bold step of building a new Clydebank shipyard on a greenfield site a few miles downstream, the flat riverbank of Barnes o' Clyde, which they bought from Miss Hamilton, owner of the Cochnau estate, This extensive site, adjoining the wide stretch of water where the Cart joins the Clyde, was ideal for building and launching the bigger and bigger ships in demand for the North Atlantic crossing. At first, the workforce were ferried in from Glasgow and Govan by paddle steamer. However, the firm quickly set about building tenement houses for the core of the workforce. The first church, the Tarry Kirk, was set up in an engine shed. A savings bank and school were also set up by Thomson. It was hardly surprising that the new settlement became known as Tamson's Toon. Thomsons were now able to build larger ships, but their move downriver coincided with a depression in trade, and for the first few years they had to build many cargo sailing ships, rather than the more profitable steam-powered passenger vessels for which the yard was intended. Money was so hard to come by that in 1879 they built the Servia, a great ship of 7,392 gross tons for Cunard, in part exchange for 3 redundant ships, £20,000 cash, and £25,000 to be paid in instalments or shares in the Cunard Company. However, the 1880s saw greatly renewed demand for passenger vessels on all routes, and Thomsons increased their commitment to Clydebank by moving the engineering and boiler-making operations downriver from Finnieston and Kelvinhaw. This allowed them to take on bigger vessels and to begin to move into the naval market. Meanwhile, other employers were following Thomson's lead. Napier, Shanks and Bell opened a yard at East Barns of Clyde. The Clyde Navigation Trust built 6 tenements for the workforce of the new repair facility at Dalmuir. The North British Chemical Works had already established a plant next to the canal at White Crook for processing kelp from the Hebrides and the West Coast in the 1860s. But by far the biggest development was the Singer Manufacturing Company's decision to build the largest and best equipped factory in the world at Kilbowie. Singer was one of the first American companies to set up a manufacturing plant in Britain. It was founded by Isaac Merritt Singer, who devised an improved mechanical sewing machine. The company took over several other patents and steadily became the largest sewing machine manufacturer, and indeed one of the largest manufacturers of anything in the world. They had already established an assembly plant in Glasgow with castings produced for them in Bonnybridge. However, they wanted to establish a self-sufficient production centre for the growing European market. Close to the canal and the railway, Kilbowie was an ideal site. The factory with its huge clock was to become as much a central part of the fabric of the Clydebank community as the shipyard.
It was a very labour-intensive industry anyway, but the fact that Singer made everything themselves had a lot to do with it, because they had to have people, tool makers to make drills and taps and dies. They had to have coppersmiths to make copper hammers. They had tinsmiths to make anything in that line. They had made their own gas. They produced their own electricity. They did everything for themselves that they possibly could, and bought as little from outside as possible. The coming of Singer with the doubling of the workforce must have had a very marked difference to the town.
This greatly increased population led to sanitary and social problems, which resulted in a drive to regularise the new settlement into a policed borough, along with Yoker and Dalmuir. Local opinion was evenly split over whether or not to form a borough at all. In 1886, the borough came into being by a margin of 1 vote. Its name was another bone of contention. Yoker and Dalmuir felt that their claims were strong, as they had been in existence for hundreds of years, while R.T. Napier of Napier, Shanks and Bell proposed Kilbowie as a more neutral name. However, there was no denying the importance of the Thomson shipyard to the development of the whole area. The drive to create a borough had also been heavily supported by James R. Thomson, who became the first provost of the newly named Clydebank Borough in 1886. At the forefront of world technology with the most advanced shipyard and the largest manufacturing operation in the world. Tamson's Toon earned a new nickname, the Risingest Borough. The Clydebank Yard had also earned a well-deserved reputation for the quality of its work. They were quick to take up new innovations, like building in steel, and making use of the experimental test tank work of Froude in the first commercial tank at Denny's in Dumbarton. The wax models could show the effects of different conditions on different types of hull.
The technique was known and established. It was the subject of a lot of scientific study because there were gaps in the knowledge and it was always being refined. And at Clydebank we did a lot of research on ship form, gradually improving our knowledge and making the extrapolation to full-scale trials much more accurate.
With this technology, Clydebank made great improvements in hull design. The construction of the great ships City of Paris and City of New York, built for the Inman Line in 1888 and 1889, was to prove a demanding test of the yard's mettle. As J.R. Thomson wrote,
"We had to do with work of a magnitude hitherto unattempted, and with details of construction in a great measure novel and without precedent of cost."
Thomson's made a considerable loss in these ships. Still more damaging was the level of investment in re-equipping the yard and engine works to build ships of this size. Unfortunately, the expected orders for more great liners never came, as there was a general downturn in demand. The firm never really recovered. After 2 attempted management reorganisations, the Clydebank yard was taken over in 1899 by its main creditors, John Brown and Company, the Sheffield steelmakers, who were keen to obtain a market for their products, particularly armour plate, as Clydebank had recently established itself as a naval yard. The Scottish steelmaker William Beardmore, owner of the famous Parkhead Forge, responded by buying land at Dalmuir and setting out to construct the most modern shipyard in the world, capable of building great naval vessels. He bought out Robert Napier's Fairning Yard at Govan to provide a skilled workforce. Clydebank was now well established as a bustling industrial town with plenty of life. The fabric of the town took shape with the construction of the town hall and borough buildings at the turn of the century. The public baths, the fire station, and the Clydebank Co-op had also been built. In 1906, the public park was opened at Dalmuir. There were many sporting and recreational groups. The town also had a well-developed cultural life, with many musical societies and bands. After a gift from Carnegie, the Clydebank Library was established. The new influx of Beardmore's workers coincided with pressure to expand the borough's boundaries. In 1906, these were extended to take in part of Mountblow and Radnor Park, where a distinctive development of flat-roof tenements, which became known as the Holy City, had recently been built by Robert McAlpine. Having built the Singer factory, McAlpine was now capitalising on the desire of more Singer employees to live near their work. He and his tenants were also avoiding the borough's building regulations and rates. Demand for Singer sewing machines was now exceeding supply, and the world's largest factory was increased in size. A new floor was added to the main building, and a whole new 6-storey block built. The boundary was moved 200 yards to the north, and the North British Railway Company moved their line and replaced and renamed Kilbowie Station. With new money from John Brown and Company, the Clydebank yard got its own testing tank, and the yard was refitted to build a succession of great liners for the North Atlantic crossing. Despite this, the profits from merchant orders, even from the great Cunarders like the beautiful Aquitania and the ill-fated Lusitania, were surprisingly low. Only naval contracts like HMS Inflexible offset this, and along with the financial strength of the parent company, these helped Clydebank survive the general slump in shipbuilding between 1907 and 1910. At Dalmuir, the first ship to be launched from Beardmore's specially designed yard was HMS Agamemnon, the largest battleship yet built on the Clyde. However, no further orders for heavy ships came from the Admiralty until 1909, and the yard had to make do with smaller naval vessels and take on some merchant orders at low prices.